Hello, podcast fans, and welcome to the Punk Rock Priest Podcast, a faith-adjacent podcast about rhythm, culture, and the outcast. I am your host, the Rev Kev, the deacon of drums, the priest of percussion, the bishop of beats, or at least that's how Jeff Two Names introduces me on stage. This week, we sat down and chatted with my good friend, Dr. Amy Potter. I met Amy and her husband, Phil, who is also a professor, years ago at my coffee shop, The Foundry. They used to use The Foundry as kind of their office away from their office, and we got to know them pretty well over the years. Dr. Amy, as I call her, is a professor of geography at Georgia Southern University at the Armstrong campus in Savannah. Her interests are cultural and human geography, and she focuses on the Caribbean and the U.S., and she especially focuses on Black geographies and kind of the intersection of tourism and public history. I find Amy's world of geography fascinating. I used to joke with both she and Phil about geography being only about map tests and the thing that you do in 7th grade social studies class. But what they do is more of a mix of sociology, psychology, anthropology, and all the things in the academic world that I find very interesting. So we sat down and we spoke a little bit about some of her work on plantations. Amy has done very interesting work also on race relations in Savannah, and particularly how it is affected or how it is engaged with Tybee Island, which used to be called Savannah Beach. I would go into further detail about our conversation, but I really will leave it to the expert, and I hope you enjoy this conversation I had with Amy. I really enjoyed it, and I learned a lot, as I always do when I have a conversation with Amy. So have a wonderful day, and enjoy this conversation with Dr. Amy Potter of Georgia Southern University. I just don't want to care at all.
I think I'm done with... Well, it's just, having things out there, and, I don't want to sound like an idiot, so.
Oh, you're probably our smartest guest that we've had, so there's that.
Dr. R's pretty cool, so.
I love Ned. And I mean, you're the third.
Love him. It's like,
you're the third professor I've had in a row.
Dang it.
I had my old seminary professor last time. So you have done some really interesting research on plantations, and you won an award. Yes. What was that award?
Yeah, we received an award in public memory from Ohio State. And essentially, one of our methods that we developed to try to capture the nuance of what was happening at these sites caught their attention. I'm a geographer, so geographers think about space and place. And so we wanted to understand on different plantation tours, what are the stories, what are the narratives that are being emphasized in different rooms.
So let's unpack that a little bit before we get into the meat of what you do. I'm sure when people hear that you're a geographer, they go back to middle school and like map quizzes.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's how, when we met, I used to joke about, that's how I thought about geography. But so tell us a little bit more about your specific field of geography, and kind of expound on that. And I asked Ned the same thing about sociology, and he stumbled over what sociology was for a second. So just wow us and show Ned up.
Okay, well, geography is what geographers do. Geography, sometimes you ask a geographer this, and this is fun. But I'm a cultural geographer, and in the last kind of 2-3 decades, there's really been a turn in the work of cultural geography, particularly with an emphasis on place and trying to unpack the meanings of place and how different cultural groups ascribe meaning to those places, and put their mark on place, right? And,
Yeah.
more like particularly this year, right? When you think about um, markers, monuments, right?
Yeah.
Who gets to claim place? Whose place is it, right? So when it comes to the work of plantations, right, we've been really thinking about whose history is getting told, who's being ignored, right? And these are important symbols of identity. They're important symbols of the region. So I don't know if that
Yeah, no, that's great. And
answers that.
it's interesting how timely your research is, because you started this years ago. And it's all kind of hitting at a very appropriate time. So you've done this research on plantations. And for those who don't live in the South, tell us how these remaining plantations that have basically turned into museums. Is that a way to say that?
So
And
we're even kind of debating this idea. I'm actually working on a paper right now with my team about should we call them museums,
mm,
and how do they feel? What did they believe their mission is?
yeah,
Right. And some it's certainly to educate, and others it's to entertain, to tell a good story.
right. Yeah. Well, so tell us about how the various plantations that you have visited, and you visited quite a few more
I've
than
even
you've.
worked at one. I was a tour guide.
Oh, that's cool. I was once a tour guide too, a ghost tour guide.
Yes, you were.
uh, Afterlife tours. That's Ryan Dunn if you're ever in Savannah. So tell us how plantations are typically presented to the public now.
Well, I certainly, so we have, kind of maybe in academia, some of the older literature that's seminal, very important work, like coming out in 2001, 2002, really drawing attention to the problematic representations that are taking place at these sites. So my colleague, David Butler, wrote a piece in 2001 called Whitewashing the Plantation, looking at how tourist brochures at plantations across the South, how they were selling themselves, right? And as you can imagine, not at all promoting the enslaved or the material culture of the enslaved. In 2002, another seminal book, if you look at plantation research by Eichstätt and Small, looking at representations of slavery at plantations in Georgia, Virginia, and Louisiana. So there's been this work out here, this like calling attention to the different ways. Eichstätt and Small talk about like different typologies, how plantations symbolically annihilate or trivialize or segregate the enslaved, the stories of the enslaved, and their contributions. But what we've started to see, and this was the focus of the grant that my research team received from the National Science Foundation back in 2013, 2014, we put in the application in 2013, that these sites were changing, right? That there was a shift occurring in terms of including the enslaved. So we wanted to see how those transitions, what they look like, and really examine it. So a lot of the research, the studies look at singular sites. They'll
Sure.
focus on a singular case study. So our work wanted to do a more holistic study and look at different regions in the South, different plantation tourism regions. So Louisiana, River Road, Charleston, James River, right? And how they were doing this, these transitions. Were they? What did it look like? So I do want to say there's this transition happening, right? Where
Sure.
we do see more incorporation. However, if you really begin to look underneath the surface, it's not enough, right? And so some examples that sites, what they'll often do is kind of an inoculation approach, where they will add a tour, a separate tour or a separate exhibit. Eichstätt and Small calls this segregation. At some sites, these tours are more accessible, to the public. There's one site in particular where you have to pay additional money to go on this separate tour that is focused on the enslaved. So I think, one of the things that our research team is really trying to look at is these changes, and what does it mean, like kind of big picture, and how is slavery still kind of relegated to the sidelines, even though there are these changes that are taking place where
Sure.
there's more discussion happening.
I mean, I grew up in the South, and I have a vision of what plantations are like, from my ingrained cultural, whatever paradigm, if you will, and it's like people sitting on this porch in this beautiful big white house with columns, and they're on a rocking chair, and there's the oak trees,
Yep.
and the moss hanging from the oak trees, and sipping sweet tea,
Or mint juleps.
Or mint juleps, right? And you have your hunting dog running around, and there's no slaves in sight. You don't see the fields. That's off somewhere else. There may be, this really nice older African American woman who's a slave that will deliver your mint julep, but she's smiling. That's what's ingrained in my head,
Right.
and I like to think that I'm intelligent enough to know that that's not real, but that I imagine that is still very prevalent, and some plantations continue they continue that narrative.
I think, what you're describing is the Gone with the Wind narrative, right? And there is so much power in that. And I think I got to a point, we actually surveyed visitors, like what media representations come to mind. And even when we did this survey, even like a year or two after, like Django Unchained came out, or 12 Years a Slave, Gone with the Wind still has this staying power. And I believe it was HBO, correct me if I'm wrong, one of these streaming services that's showing Gone with the Wind they're pulling it off, and they're going to contextualize it.
Yeah.
Right, because it's very powerful, and even I would ask students if they've seen Gone with the Wind, and a lot of them hadn't, but it was still so powerful they knew about it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's just this very pervasive narrative, this very powerful and obviously incredibly problematic.
Yeah, everybody knows in the South, whether they've seen it or not, they know the name Miss Scarlet. They know there's something about drapes, and they know, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. That's, they have at least those things. Yeah. So as you guys have done this research, what positive changes have you seen?
I mean, certainly there's been some sites that like very powerfully like will put the lives of the enslaved, the material culture of the enslaved, alongside the typical presentation of the white plantation owner, right? So really, there's been some really positive adjustments in bringing the enslaved into those spaces that had formerly, I guess, been denied in telling those stories, when they should have been there all along. They were there, right? I think what's really interesting, like in terms of our research, is you have like the more traditional plantations that have generally promoted this Gone with the Wind, very romanticized narrative, that have been around for quite some time. I mean, this is big business. You have some sites that have been operating giving tours of their gardens since 1870. But what's been really interesting are these new plantation sites that opened in 2014, 2015 in a very different historical context, right? So you have to think about these older sites opened, lost cause mythology, right? All of that. And then you have these new sites that are opening, a couple new ones, one in Charleston, one in Louisiana, the River Road area, that have completely thrown out like what has been done, right? They've kind of reinvented it. And for example, de-emphasizing the big house, the mansion, right? So in Charleston, you have McLeod. Tours don't even go into the big house, right? Whitney Plantation, you're maybe in there 5 minutes. And it's just not the focus. The focus is on the lives of the enslaved and contextualizing that. I think what's also powerful, particularly the site McLeod, that the story doesn't end with the Civil War. They powerfully connect to like what happened after the triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, civil rights, how you had people still living in the original slave cabins until 1990.
Wow.
Renting them as homes.
Wow.
So there's really some interesting things happening, this parting of ways. And I think they're able to kind of throw off all these perceived expectations. Because even what we've noticed is sites that have really made some pretty significant changes. They can't shake the moment, the big reveal of the Oak Alley. Can't shake it. It's even with all the changes, right? That is still that moment, that emotional moment that they hype the visitor up. And it completely unravels all of these other things that they've done, because that's the moment.
Well, that's when I think of a plantation. I think of, you go in the gates and there's this road lined with oak trees. I mean, kind of like Wormslow and Savannah. And and it takes you to this big, humongous house, and that's grand and awe-inspiring. And that's how I view plantation.
Yeah, and they've sold it that way.
Yeah.
Right. And there's been a very intentional packaging, right? When you think about how they market themselves, there's been and it's a long-standing tradition. So for example, Charleston tourism has been selling flowers and gardens since the 20s and 30s at least. And then you have a plantation that's been selling its gardens since the 1870s, shortly after the Civil War.
Wow.
So this is a long time. This is not new. I mean, these are layers.
Yeah. And tourism is big business in places like Savannah and Charleston.
Right.
And so you have people coming to see what they would say is their heritage. And I've seen a lot of pushback as plantations begin to add more of a full context to what actually happened. There's been a lot of pushback that I've seen by Southerners who just want to see how their, air quotes, culture was. So that's, I say all that to say that it's big business and it's hard to shift.
Yeah. We absolutely, our research team, there is a demand for it. When we survey visitors, they are interested.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that management needs to be afraid of.
Right.
You're going to have, there was a flurry of pieces last year, like in the Washington Post, and like, people going to TripAdvisor and making comments, but, we're seeing a shift. Younger folks, going to these sites, a shift in a more diverse population.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's um,
Well, having run a business, I know that the people that post things on places or sites like Yelp and TripAdvisor are not the um, most wonderful people sometimes.
it's kind of like the extremes of student reviews.
Right, right, yeah.
You
You don't
kind of
get any
get
bad.
the I love you, I hate you, and
Yeah.
then
Well, you don't get any bad reviews, I'm sure.
never.
Never, never. I am. Yeah. I that whole like rate your professor thing is so
I
bizarre
don't
to
even
me.
look. I don't look.
I
It'll.
couldn't. I couldn't. I'm glad there's no rate your priest. Um, yeah. No, that's bizarre to me. But I went to college before the internet was a big thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, before cell phones.
Ah,
Um, oh, the days. Um, so back to the topic at hand. You were talking about expanding the clientele of these tours. What have you guys found with the interest from the African American community? Has that been? Is there a growing interest?
I think there's like a bit of a diversity of thought in
Mm-hmm.
terms of that. I think you have some potential Black tourists that want to have absolutely nothing to do with a plantation,
Sure.
nothing, and rightly so, and that's very fair because these sites have traditionally not honored um, this history
Yeah.
and not done it justice, or it's just too painful. It can be very painful. um, I think you have sites like Whitney. Whitney had the highest of those we surveyed, and I would just say, like, just going to Whitney several times, every time I've taken a tour there in Louisiana, high percentage of Black visitors
Yeah.
on the tour, and higher percentages than any of the other sites we toured that are touring Whitney. And some of the interviews, the responses, and very emotional, potentially from Black visitors. This is a sacred space.
Yeah.
Connection to the ancestors, right? And really trying to honor that history and their memory. So, I think it's varied. It really varies. But when sites don't honor that and don't hold it with care, that history with care, and just even the legacies from that history, it's very painful.
Yeah. I can't get past the thought of Jewish people going to concentration camps today and um, that comparison. I mean, is that fair? I mean, obviously, not obviously. I don't know if that's a fair comparison.
I think it's an interesting comparison. Like, you would never see someone get married at Auschwitz, right?
I would hope
I
not.
mean,
I mean, I don't know.
so it's really interesting how these sites have been transformed.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's very intentional, right?
Right.
This long history, lost cause mythology, it was a very intentional forgetting.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Lost
yeah,
cause mythology. I like that. Can you unpack that a little bit?
I think you're setting up, this idea, kind of romanticizing the Civil War. This is where, this lost South, really kind of setting up good memories, about this time period. Also, during the Lost Cause, you start to see the Civil War not about slavery,
Right.
kind of a rewriting. But Lost Cause mythology, again, the plantation is square in it, right? For forgetting or erasing slavery, the brutality of slavery, that humans were held captive at these places, and again, romanticizing it, romanticizing this past, romanticizing this racism, the lynchings, Jim Crow, all tied up in this mythology that wasn't real.
Right.
Part of this, you mentioned the white pillars. Interestingly, for some of these homes, the pillars were added after the Civil War,
Interesting.
right? And even the Confederate monuments that are going up in 1910, like, a lot of them are going up like in the 1910s,
right,
at the height of this lost cause mythology, this rethinking of the South.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah, we talked about that with Dr. Rinalducci. We talked a little bit about our experiences of learning history, and I talked about my experience of learning history in the Deep South, and being told very much that the Civil War was about states' rights.
Yeah. And
states'
even
rights.
reworking
states' rights, yeah,
like reworking textbooks, and you have like South Carolina like banning certain textbooks and promoting. I mean, that's intense,
Yeah, well, and most of the textbooks are written in Texas, in a state that has very checkered past with altering history. It's kind of terrifying.
It was interesting for me because I started my schooling here in Georgia, and then I moved to New York, and to have two different understandings of how Civil War history was taught. That states' rights in the South, and then as soon as you bring up that argument in the North, my civics professor was like, states' rights to do what?
Right, exactly.
And that just turns that argument right around. I was going to ask you, one of the cool things I've seen recently is the lynching monument. I think it's in Montgomery, Alabama, and sort of what they're doing with that. Do you see any, I know you talked about how plantations are sort of changing the perspective of how you see them. Do you see any other museums like that or trying to make a broader statement?
I mean,
in Georgia or elsewhere in the South?
You have the fabulous Civil Rights Museum in Atlanta. You have, in Montgomery, Equal Justice Initiative, the Lynching Memorial, the Smithsonian, the new museum on the mall. So I think we've got some big splash moments that are happening, but you also have like these smaller museums that have been doing this work for a while, right? So
well, it's interesting, the lynching museum, because the Diocese of Georgia has a really good relationship with Dr. Catherine Meeks, who has had a big role in that, and she's in Atlanta. And the purpose of the lynching museum is that counties will go to the museum and bring back the parts from their county and start something there. So each county is represented, each county in the South is represented, and there is a coffin with the county's name on it and the names of the people that have been lynched. But
it's even outside. So
right. And the idea is to bring it back with you.
Yeah. Well, and claim it, right? And put it somewhere in a public way so we can, because, we talk a lot about slavery, but this is the aftermath. These are the reverberations to control, right? To instill terror. It was really interesting, where my family is from in Kansas. They're like one of like a couple counties represented, and that county has one. So it's not even just the South, the traditional South, right?
Yeah, I know that Bishop Ben Hayes was working to try to get the Chatham County one back here.
Yeah,
I don't know if,
I remember hearing about that. Yeah,
I'm in New York now, but there, where you two are, I don't know if that ever happened. I know my friend David Rose is in Effingham, and he's really trying to begin that conversation in Effingham. There was a huge slave massacre in Effingham, along the Ebenezer Creek.
Yes. Yeah.
Well,
they were basically just left there.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe slave is the wrong.
They were recaptured and.
Yeah, I can't remember. I couldn't remember where it was in history, but that's a tough road to hoe, to use a farm analogy, because I served at Effingham, and that's one of those places in the South where this message will come very late. It's the romanticism of the South and the Confederacy is very deep and ingrained.
Well, if you drive out to Ebenezer Creek, you'd pass a lot of Confederate flags.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
We just did the drive a couple weeks ago to go kayaking out there. So
it's beautiful. One of my old church members owns a house along the creek.
It was fabulous.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Pretty rough history here. So
yeah, absolutely. So so if you were to take over a plantation, you were to leave academia because you had done all the things that you could possibly do, ride high on your student evaluations out of academia, and take over a plantation, how would you design a holistic interpretation?
Yeah. I mean, it really, I think, we have some good models actually what this looks like. And again, going back to those new sites that came on scene in 2014 and 2015. And it's really, like a reimagining every facet of the site. And I think that's why some of this it's not working and it's not doing the reparative history work at these other sites. So just adding an exhibit, right? Just doing that or adding a separate tour, it doesn't work. So our research team thinks about the plantation like an assemblage, that it is an assemblage of human, non-human actors, kind of all interacting together. And so key components of the assemblage, right, are just even like from the top, the messaging, what's the mission? What's your mission statement, right?
Right.
And, McLeod, mission to do this interpretation into 1990, right? And look at this African-American experience. It also, involves management, right? And management being on board to carry out that mission, that vision. It involves the training of guides, seeking out guides that have a passion for sharing this hard history, right? It is exhausting. You interview guides that are day in, day out, talking to visitors about slavery. It is hard. It is emotional labor, as public historian Amy Tyson calls it, this tough emotional labor. So you have to provide support systems for guides to be able to do this, to be able to navigate sometimes a public that is going to potentially get nasty, push back in, very negative ways. So how do you navigate that? It creating support systems for guides to design tours, right, that connect to the mission of the site, right? And I really appreciate how both Whitney and McLeod really de-emphasize the big house. I think that's really powerful and focus on the landscape and bringing in those stories and those interpretations. It's about how you advertise yourself. You're going to advertise the oak trees, what kind of message are you sending to the public about what they're going to expect? I mean, it's really, like thinking about all these components and including the lives of the enslaved throughout the entire experience, and not just parceling it off to, again, separate tours or a room here, a room there. I don't know if that makes sense. So.
No, absolutely. So it's a lot to think about, especially for those who are listening from the South, like myself. You two are kind of hybrids, I guess. Transplants. Dan's kind of had feet in both worlds. And I mean, you have too. You went to school in Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
Did I say that right? Louisiana? No. Okay, I tried. My Florida. Apparently, I will tell you up here, apparently I have an accent, a Southern accent.
I was wondering how folks were going to respond to you.
The first time somebody told me that, I was deeply offended.
Yeah.
You do say y'all a lot.
I try not to. I can't help it. But yeah, I had somebody at this little deli. He said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Well, I'm from Florida, but I just moved here from Savannah." And he got this big smile on his face.
Mm-hmm,
like, yeah, well, of course you are. Of course you're from Savannah.
Well, I've been told my accent is neutral like the Queen when I did field work in Barbuda.
Interesting.
So I'll take it. Okay.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, so I always ask some fun questions.
Oh, okay.
They're easy.
Oh,
first,
no.
I'll say, I mean, you used to work like 24/7 at my coffee shop. Where do you work now? Do you have a place? Do you have to just not do work?
I work at school and at home.
How boring.
I miss
How boring.
the factory. I know. It was actually, yeah, you guys aren't going to include this, but it's like, that was a major blow. I never went in there again. So I've tried Foxy, but I'm not cool enough for Foxy sometimes. Like
it's a little cramped in there too.
It is. Like, you got to get there early. You got to beat the SCAD students there, so sometimes it works, but yeah. So it's, that's been a major adjustment.
Yeah, it's been hard for me to find a place. I mean, I'm used to working out of coffee shops too. And of course, they're all closed up here. So
yeah, they're closed up here too, down here as well.
Yeah. There is one that I've found that I really like, that I've connected with, and like I have some connection to some of the people that work there, which is, it's such a small world. But I can't go in there and work. So
yeah, we did venture out in Pensacola to this place called Constant Coffee. It's a great little place, but Savannah, it's Foxy, if I'm feeling cool enough to go be amongst, the Scadsters. So.
Right. Yeah. So the question that I ask everybody at the end, what music are you listening to?
Goodness. Okay. So,
there's no right answer.
I'm like, I'm like a top 40 kind of gal. And then lately, as I'm aging, like, no offense to 98.7 The River, I really love like this older 80s, 90s, and today songs. I also, my dad passed away a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. So I really connect with him through music, through classic rock.
All right.
So, I have his record player, and when we were back in Kansas this summer to help my mom out, we were wondering where his good like really good stuff was. And we found The Wall, we found Abbey Road, Queen, like Phil, like where was this? We think he hid it from us, because like I mean,
don't touch my records.
Yeah. Yes. So, but I kind of listen to everything, but I really connect with my dad through music. So like I'll put on my like classic rock playlist, and it makes me happy. So
that's awesome. Well, that's about it thanks for chatting with us and sharing
Thanks
your
for having me.
wisdom with us. That's a lot to think about.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's so much more.
So I hope you enjoyed Dr. Amy and I's conversation about her research. I hope you agree with me that it was, in fact, fascinating, and that is the appropriate word. So the band I'm sharing with you this week is the Jukebox Romantics. We have had the fortunate occasion to have played with and met Terry and Bobby and Norm, and I've had the pleasure of getting to know Terry a little bit. The Jukebox Romantics are from Westchester, or at least Terry is, and so I've actually gotten to play with him a little bit since I moved up here. I'm not sure why he has chosen to play with me after playing with Norm. I feel very inadequate sitting down on the drums knowing that Terry's played with Norm, but I digress. The song I'm going to play for you is called First Time You, First Time Me. It's off their album Sleepwalk Me Home from 2017. It's a great song. It's very anthemic. It certainly has some great lines in it, one of which is the beginning line that says, Dad, I'm a punk rocker, which always makes me laugh. And then the end kind of has this chorus that reminds me of Pennywise. And the words are this: and we won't stop screaming at the top of our lungs for something we believe in until our hearts stop beating. If we all stand together, we can make this life better if we try. What a great message for us, especially in 2020. So I leave you with the song First Time You, First Time Me by the Jukebox Romantics.
I'm a punk rocker. There's no growing